This podcast explores the workings of the criminal justice system, including the investigation and prosecution of serious offences involving sexual and physical violence. Episodes may contain detailed and sometimes graphic accounts drawn directly from case files, witness testimony and court proceedings, including those involving adult and child victims. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Criminal Justice in Action Season 1, Rape on Trial. I'm Dr Candida Saunders and this is episode 6, which sees us back in Court 2 for the second part of Dean's trial, a real-life rape trial in a real Crown Court somewhere in England and Wales, fully anonymised, obviously edited down for time, but as close as I can get you to the real thing without you having to take a week off work and actually come along with me. If you're new to the podcast, you may want to pause here and go back at least to episode 5, which is where the trial began. For returning listeners, though, here's the quickest of quick recaps. Dean was set to be tried on multiple counts involving two complainants, Anya and Erica, both ex-girlfriends of Dean's. But yesterday, the morning of the first day of trial, Dean pleaded guilty to all the violent offences, ABH and so on the indictment relating to both complainants. He also pleaded guilty to some additional charges relating to witness intimidation and the harassment of Erica. That left just 2 charges on the indictment, 1 count of sexual assault and 1 of rape, oral rape. Anya is the complainant in both instances. Yesterday, day 1, we heard the jury's initial directions and the prosecution's opening speech presented by Mr Peters, counsel for the prosecution. Problems with the court's IT equipment meant Anya's ABE video, her pre-recorded video evidence, couldn't be played and the jury was sent home early. We saw Anya's video evidence this morning, day 2, although not without further IT glitches. Then there was a problem with the audio on the video link. So Anya, who was all set to undergo cross-examination remotely, she had to come to court after all. She took the stand a couple of minutes before 3 o'clock this afternoon. But that was where we ended the last episode. Not because I like a cliffhanger, but because Anya's about to have a hell of a time in cross-examination, and I wanted to give that the time and space, the critical air and light it deserves. So that's where we're at. We're back in court on day 2 of Dean's trial. It's 14:58 and Anya's cross-examination's about to begin. Prosecuting counsel, Mr Peters, tells His Honour he has no questions for the witness. He also tells the judge that while Anya's English is extremely good, there may be some questions or answers where she might need the assistance of an interpreter. "All right, thank you very much," says the judge. "Mr Charles?" Mr Charles steps up. "Very good," he says, nodding slightly to the judge before he turns to face Anya. "Anya," says Mr Charles, "I ask questions on behalf of the defendant, the man you know as Dean, yes?" "Yes." "We've just seen today 2 interviews that you gave to the police," he continues. "In fairness to you," he says, "you did not have an interpreter present for either of those, did you?" "No," says Anya. The first question he wants to ask her, he says, is when she last saw those videos, when she last watched them back. "Saturday," she tells him. "OK," nods Mr Charles, "because I don't want to be unfair to you. They lasted quite a long time. You said many things in them, and I'm going to ask you some questions about the things you said in those videos, all right?" "Yes," says Anya. Mr Charles asks her to confirm the dates of both interviews, which she does. They were made just shy of a couple of years prior to the trial we're watching. "So we're going back to a time of your life some time ago now. Do you agree with that?" asks Mr Charles. "She does, yes." "Now," says Mr Charles, "were you in any difficulty in those interviews due to the fact that you didn't have an interpreter?" "Yes and no," says Anya. Mr Charles asks her to explain. "Tell me why yes and tell me why no," he asks. "Yes, because she was able to pronounce herself," she says. and no, because she didn't have enough words to put it correctly. OK, says Mr. Charles. Now, I'm not criticising you. Did you ask for an interpreter? No. Was she offered one? No. Mr. Charles now asks Anya, more than once and in several different ways, whether, having watched her video interviews, whether there's anything she's thinking she didn't express accurately at the time because of her English. Anya's struggling a bit with this question. It is a bit convoluted. I'm not really sure what you're actually asking me now, she says. Yes, says Mr. Charles, that's my fault. When you watched those videos, was there anything in them that was inaccurate that you'd like to clarify now? No, says Anya. So, he says, you are saying everything you said is true and accurate? Yes, says Anya. So, explain to me and us why you were hampered by not having an interpreter, says Mr. Charles. What would you have liked to have said? She's talking now about her grammar, that listening back she could see some of her answers weren't grammatically correct, but the meaning was correct. Thank you for that clarification, says Mr. Charles. So you criticised the grammar, but the content is all accurate. You were not unable to say what you wanted to say because you didn't have an interpreter. Is that fair? Yes, says Anya. And you confirm that what you said then is what you stand by now? Yes, says Anya. Having confirmed with Anya that she's happy with and stands by the content of her statements to police, Mr. Charles moves on to the business of setting out the defence's stall. Well, Dean's stall. Just so there should be no misunderstanding between you and me, he tells Anya, Dean accepts that in the course of his relationship with you, he was violent towards you. Anya agrees, yes. He accepts that he attacked you physically, yes? Yes, says Anya. And, says Mr. Charles, I'm sure you know that he has pleaded guilty to attacking you when you collected him on the 20th of September in the car. Yes. He's admitted doing what you accused him of doing in that video, all right? Yes. I cannot speak for him in terms of how he feels about that, but he has accepted that. He's also pleaded guilty to physically assaulting you on the second occasion. Yes? Yes, says Anya. He accepts that he is guilty of attacking you, but what he says happened during that attack is slightly different to what you say happened. OK, says Mr. Charles. OK, says Anya. So he still accepts that he is guilty. He understands he will be punished for that, as well as what happened on the 20th of September. But I have to ask you questions in terms of the parts that he disagrees with. All right? OK, says Anya. I want you also to understand that I'm not going to accuse you of having done anything wrong. All right, says Mr. Charles. OK, says Anya. But I know that Dean did accuse you of doing things wrong in relation to your relationship with him, yes? Yes, says Anya. I'm not asking you whether you did or whether you did not and go into detail in the videos, but we know that Dean accused you of cheating on him, yes? Yes, says Anya. And I say now, it does not matter if you did, and it does not matter if you did not, OK? And you explained in the video that you did not. But you said that you admitted to him that you did, because you thought it would be a better way to deal with it, says Mr. Charles. Yes, says Anya. Is that fair how I'm describing it, yes? Yes. So, on the second date, it is right, I think we will agree that you and Dean were still arguing about whether you'd been unfaithful to him, yes? Yes. It is not something he could let go of, says Mr. Charles. Do you remember when you got to the house? It started on the stairs. The argument carried on and you were on the stairs. Anya disagrees. No, she says, it started on the sofa. OK, fine, says Mr. Charles. It continued on the stairs. Do you remember that you were a few steps up and he was at the bottom of the stairs? Do you agree with that? Yes, says Anya. And at this point, says Mr. Charles, it was verbal arguing between you, shouting and screaming. No, it's already started, says Anya. The abuse already started on the sofa. She's asked if she remembers grabbing a piece of pipe and hitting Dean with it. Yes, she says, to push him away from me. You called him a bastard, says Mr. Charles. Yes, she says. He deserved to be called a bastard for the way he was treating you, says Mr. Charles. So that is what you called him, yes? Yes. And you hurt his finger. He put his hands up to defend himself and you hurt his finger with the pipe. Yes, says Anya. Again, says Mr. Charles, it's just so that we can be clear about what happened. It is not because I'm accusing you of doing something you shouldn't have done, OK? After you hit him with the pipe, he then punched you to the face, yes? Yes. Which he accepts having done, says Mr. Charles, and you punched him back to his face. Do you remember that? Yes, says Anya. And then, unfortunately, he attacked you with more violence, punching you, slapping you, yes? Yes. And then you managed to land quite a good punch to his nose, yes? Yes. I think you broke his nose. There was blood everywhere, says Mr. Charles. There was blood, says Anya, but I'm not sure if it was broken or not. That's fair enough, says Mr. Charles. You're not a doctor, but you bloodied his nose when you were fighting back. Yes, says Anya. At that point, says Mr. Charles, that stopped the fighting. It was a bit of a shock. Yes, says Anya, he didn't expect me to give something back. Mr. Charles then says that following this, Dean went into the kitchen to clean himself up, which Anya agrees with. You came into the kitchen, says Mr. Charles, and you got a steak knife from the drawer. No, says Anya. OK, says Mr. Charles, I'm going to try and jog your memory here about that, because you used that to clean your fingernails. No, says Anya. Now, in fairness to Mr. Charles, it's worth emphasising here that he hasn't made any suggestions about it being 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, which it plainly wasn't and seldom is. And he hasn't suggested that she gave as good as she got, which again, she plainly didn't. Rather, the suggestion seems to be that Anya was perhaps feistier than might be expected given the circumstances. The inference that I think we're subtly being asked to draw is that Anya was more angry than she was frightened. She's hit back, she's hit Dean with a pipe, landed a good punch here and there, bloodied Dean's nose, all of which Anya's accepting and agreeing with, until it's put to her that she had a kitchen knife at some point. No, she says, I never had a knife. Don't you remember, asks Mr. Charles, you were sitting on the sofa with Dean and you were cleaning your nails with the tip of the knife. No, says Anya. She can't remember specifically about going into the kitchen, but she knows 100% that she didn't take a knife and she didn't clean her nails with one. So, says Mr. Charles, that is my suggestion. That is what you did. You went and sat on the sofa, and that is what you were doing on the sofa. Do you remember saying to Dean this shouldn't have happened, as you were sort of apologising to him? For what? Asks Anya. Punching his nose, says Mr. Charles. No, says Anya. Mr. Charles is quick to come back. What Dean did not do is that he did not strangle you that day, did he? Yes, he did. And you didn't faint either, did you? Yes, he did. He did strangle me. And I was losing consciousness, yes. Did you? Asks Mr. Charles. Did it cause any marks or injuries to your neck? All of the photos of her injuries are in the file, says Anya. Ah, but does Anya remember having injuries to her neck? Did she have bruising around her neck? She doesn't remember, but she says if the bruises were there, the photos will show that. Mr. Charles moves on to the following morning and Dean's further disagreements with her version of events, specifically Anya's account of being driven around, Dean showing her injuries off to his mates. That didn't happen, did it? Says Mr. Charles. Yes, it did. He didn't drive you to his brother's. He did. He didn't take her to someone else's and invite them to assault her. He did. Mr. Charles suggests that no, they were both in the house following the fight after he attacked you, and you were both there until the police arrived. That is a lie, says Anya. Mr. Charles leaves it there and moves on. One or two other details I want to ask you about, says Mr. Charles. It's the passport. He now puts to Anya that the reason she needed a replacement passport wasn't because Dean had ripped hers up. It was because the front cover on her passport had come apart and she was nervous she wouldn't be allowed to travel with it. No, says Anya, Dean had ripped her passport up. That's why she needed a replacement. It may be that you are simply mistaken, Mr. Charles continues, because Dean did rip up the passport, but it was later. It was long after the wedding. It was after they got back from their own holiday, after the petrol station incident. No, she says, it was way before that. It was in the summer. It may not matter, says Mr. Charles. Pay attention, listener, because it's going to matter. It may not matter, says an apparently nonchalant Mr. Charles, but what Dean says is that he ripped up your old passport after the holiday, and that the earlier trip for the replacement passport was because yours was frayed. No, says Anya, that's not true at all. You can see it all in the evidence. I went to the embassy to get my new passport. Yes, we know that, says Mr. Charles. He's about to say something else, but Anya's still talking. You can see the dates on it, she says. It's clear enough that it wasn't after the holiday. It was in the summer. Mr. Charles lets the issue lie and moves on to his next topic, the arrival of the police after that final beating, when Dean was arrested. Now, when the police came, you told them, broadly speaking, that Dean had been violent and had beaten you up, he says. Yes, says Anya. Because that is exactly what had happened, is it not? Yes. What you did not tell the police was that he had raped you. Correct, says Anya, yes. Any particular reason why? Asks Mr. Charles. Had you forgotten? No, I hadn't forgotten. Anya is clearly affected by this question. We can't see her, but you can hear it in her voice. She's louder, she's talking faster, she sounds angry and aghast. I was embarrassed, she says. I didn't even want to tell them anything. Remember, Anya isn't the one who called the police. But the police officers told me, you've got to tell us what happened, and they were asking me questions, and I was just saying yes. They didn't ask me has anything else happened, or like exactly what. The police didn't ask me, for example, did he rape you? And because that wasn't mentioned as an example, I didn't say anything about that. The question wasn't put to me directly. So, says Mr. Charles, are you suggesting that in order for you to have complained of rape, they would have specifically had to ask you, did he rape you, or did he sexually assault you? Yes, says Anya. So, unless they asked you, you wouldn't have told them, yes? Anya's becoming increasingly distressed now. She didn't mention it to the police then, she says, because she'd had 2 days of constant abuse. She was embarrassed. She wasn't, quote, completely okay within myself, and she didn't know who she could trust. To be fair to you, says Mr. Charles, it was more than 2 days of abuse, wasn't it? It was more than that. Yes, says Anya. What I want to understand, Mr. Charles is saying, is what changed between not telling anyone on the day the police came, but mentioning it the following day in the video interview. What changed? She'd spoken to her friend, she's saying. She told her friend everything, and that friend had said she needed to tell the police, that she'd got to tell them. Her friend told her, he's got to pay for what he's done to you. You can't keep that a secret. I think everyone would agree that he has to pay for what he did to you, says Mr. Charles. The question is what it is that he has done to you. Do you understand that? Yes, says Anya. Because Dean accepts being violent to you, but he denies sexually assaulting you, and he denies orally raping you, all right? OK, says Anya. They go over when, precisely, Anya had spoken to the friend. It was that same evening after she'd been to the hospital and the night before the video interview. Mr. Charles then moves on to the video interview itself. He asks Anya if she remembers what she said in response to the officer's first question in her video interview, when she was asked what it was they were there to talk about. Yes, she says, it was about the abuse. Yes, says Mr. Charles. It's not a memory test, he says, but what you said was getting beat up by my boyfriend. Yes, there's nothing about sex or rape or sexual assault there, was there? Not specifically in that sentence, says Anya, no. Why? Because I continued after that. I've been telling everything what happened step by step, she says. I've told what happened. Well, did you embellish it? Asks Mr. Charles. No. Did you make it worse for Dean deliberately? No. Did you mix truth with lies? No. Because if you had really spoken to your friend, says Mr. Charles, and had been determined that you were going to tell the police about the sexual abuse and about the oral rape, surely that is the first thing you would have said to the officer. Can you tell me what that is? And you say, getting beaten up by my boyfriend, getting sexually assaulted by my boyfriend, being raped by my boyfriend, or something like that. This carries on for a couple of minutes, Mr. Charles suggesting that there weren't any sexual assaults, that she's made it up during the interview so that things will be even worse for Dean, and Anya repeatedly disagreeing. I've not made any lies, says Anya. So what have you made? Asks Mr. Charles. I haven't made anything up, says Anya, because it is obviously far worse for Dean, who will be punished far more heavily if he's found to have raped you, as he admitted he attacked you. You understand that, don't you, says Mr. Charles. Very good, says Anya. The judge interrupts. Sorry, he says to Anya, you've just replied very good. Is that very good I understand what you are saying, or very good that he will be punished? That he will be punished, says Anya. Mr. Charles then shifts focus to the oral rape. He asks a few questions about where everyone was, what positions she and Dean were in, and whether Dean ejaculated. But it's brief. I mean, really brief. Perhaps surprisingly brief. It's maybe a minute of her evidence, 2 tops. He asks if when the police came she'd pointed out her vomit to them. Yes. Then, out of nowhere, a sudden change of topic. Do you know someone called Jimmy? Asks Mr. Charles. Yes, says Anya. Who is he? A friend's ex-boyfriend, says Anya. Have you been talking to him today? Asks Mr. Charles. Yes, says Anya. What were you talking to him about? About how I feel. What, generally, or in relation to this case? Asks Mr. Charles. To this case, says Anya. How did you communicate with him? Messenger, says Anya. Is that Facebook Messenger? Asks Mr. Charles. Yes. Typed messages? Yes. Or phone calls or video calls? No, says Anya, just type. Mr. Charles pushes her on this, but Anya's insistent. No, she says, no phone calls, no messenger calls, just typed messages. Do you remember you called him at 9:33 this morning? Asks Mr. Charles. There's a pause. I did? Asks Anya. Yes, says Mr. Charles. You did? No, says Anya. Would it help if you saw a screenshot of that phone call? Asks Mr. Charles. Would that jog your memory? There's another pause. He tried to call me, she says eventually, but I didn't pick up the phone. But that's not true, says Mr. Charles. You did speak to him, did you not? No. Do you remember what you told him? When? Today, says Mr. Charles, and in fact in the months leading up to this case. Again, we can't see Anya, but she sounds stunned, bewildered, confused. She does. Can you just repeat the question, she says, because I'm not really sure where you're getting with that. Do not worry about where I'm getting, says Mr. Charles. Just see if you understand the question. Have you been discussing with Jimmy in the last few months as well as today? Have you been discussing your evidence in this case with Jimmy? She's been messaging with Jimmy, yes, but there's not been any face-to-face. All right, says Mr. Charles, and do you agree that you have told Jimmy that you were not going to be straight up in court today because you want Dean to suffer? No. And effectively, you were going to try and make things as bad for Dean as possible, says Mr. Charles. No, says Anya. Is that a lie? Asks Mr. Charles. Is that wrong? I did not say those things, says Anya. Mr. Charles refers again to her and Jimmy's conversation that morning and the phone call. There's no phone call, insists Anya. You can see it's a missed call. I didn't pick up. That's not true, is it? Says Mr. Charles. Yes, says Anya, it's true. You've been telling Jimmy for the past few months you're going to stitch Dean up. This is more a statement than a question. No, says Anya firmly. Another swift change of topic. Do you know someone called Ryan? Asks Mr. Charles. Yes, says Anya. She sounds shaken again. Who is he? Asks Mr. Charles. An ex-boyfriend, Anya says, before Dean. Mr. Charles asks Anya if she remembers she made an allegation against him he gives her a specific date. It's about a year before she met Dean. In what? Asks Anya, sounding more and more bewildered. Accused in what? You accused him of sexual assault. Do you remember that? Says Mr. Charles. It takes her a minute, but Anya's apparently starting to understand what Mr. Charles is referring to. I never went through with it, she says. I never signed the papers. That is true, says Mr. Charles, but you accused him of sexual assault, did you not? Yes, says Anya, because he was really pushy on me. He kept asking, but I kept saying no, and that's why I didn't go any further. Let's just take it in stages, says Mr. Charles. You alleged that following an argument with Ryan, he ripped off your pants and inserted his fingers in your vagina without your consent. Do you remember that? No. You don't remember making that allegation to police? No. Nor does she remember Ryan being arrested that night, or emailing the police later saying she wanted to drop the charges and that she'd lied in her statement. It doesn't actually matter that you cannot remember, says Mr. Charles, because the police have records of all these matters. So if you can't remember, that's not really the end of it, because the computers remember this, all right? OK, says Anya. Let's see if this jogs your memory, Mr. Charles continues, because it's not something I would have thought happens very often, making what you said was a false allegation against a boyfriend of sexual assault. Am I wrong? Not often, says Anya. No, says Mr. Charles, but you still cannot remember making this allegation against Ryan. No. Really? Really, says Mr. Charles. He sounds shocked. He doesn't look shocked, but he sounds it. You cannot remember it, he asks. Yes, says Anya, I can't. I can't remember making any statements or writing an email. OK, let's not play around, says Mr. Charles. Do you remember telling the police that he sexually assaulted you? I don't remember it clearly, like if it was yesterday, she says. Well, it wasn't yesterday, says Mr. Charles. It was over 3 years ago. So, he says, we'll give you a pass for not remembering it like it was yesterday. But do you remember doing it, he asks. Do you remember making that allegation? He broke into my house, says Anya. I remember that. He was covered in blood and smelled of cocaine. So do you remember accusing him of sexually assaulting you, says Mr. Charles. It's a really simple question. You either do remember it or you do not remember it. Yes, she says. You do? Mr. Charles now both looks and sounds surprised. I remember it now because of the flashbacks and trying to get back into that specific time, says Anya. Oh, I see, says Mr. Charles. And I'm having the flashbacks of the officers coming to the house and taking the statement, Anya continues. But you did not remember it 5 minutes ago, says Mr. Charles. No, because I blocked the information, the bad stuff. I block it off because a lot of things happened, and I had concussions, said Anya. Did you block the bad stuff that Dean's done to you, asks Mr. Charles. I mean, you seem to be able to remember that. What? Says Anya. She asks him to repeat the question. Do you remember the bad stuff that Dean's done to you, says Mr. Charles. Yes, because it's affected me really badly, says Anya. What? Says Mr. Charles. And what Ryan did not affect you? No, because it's not the same, completely not the same, she says. Well, maybe it is the same, says Mr. Charles. Maybe it's just false allegations that you make against your partners. No, says Anya, firmly. Mr. Charles now slowly and deliberately pushes home the point that Anya's taken an oath to tell the truth, that just 5 minutes ago she couldn't remember making an allegation against Ryle, that she said that was a truthful answer, and that he's had to give her several reminders before she's finally remembered the allegations she made. Anya agrees that she didn't remember and agrees that yes, she remembers now, but she says Ryan wasn't arrested in front of her and she still doesn't remember asking for any charges to be dropped against Ryan because she'd lied in her statement. In fact, to be fair, it's not clear from Anya's evidence that she accepts ever making a statement. You see, the truth is, Anya, says Mr. Charles, Dean treated you despicably and he was regularly violent to you in a horrific way. That is the truth, is it not? Yes, she says. That is what the police wanted to interview you about, and that is ultimately what Dean's admitted doing, is it not? Yes. And just like with Ryan, when you were making your complaint, because you said that Ryan physically abused you as well, yes? Yes. And just in the same way, when you told the police, you did not just stick to the truth, did you? You exaggerated it and made up allegations of sexual assault and oral rape. I'm lost, says Anya. I'm not sure which case you're referring to now. I'm talking about this case, says Mr. Charles, but my point is you did the same thing to Dean as you did to Ryan. Can you please repeat your question, Anya asks, because I don't understand. Yes, says Mr. Charles. We agree that Dean was despicable towards you and he beat you to the point where you could not be beaten any more. Yes, says Anya. Because who knows where it would have ended and what he would have done to you, says Mr. Charles. Yes, says Anya. And you had the courage, says Mr. Charles, and it really is the courage to tell the police about this. And when the police were talking to you and you were telling them about the way he'd been beating you up, during the course of that otherwise truthful account, you made up things that were not true about sexual assault, about oral rape, those things which did not happen. No, says Anya. No. Thank you, says Mr. Charles. Your Honour, I do not have any more questions. The jury is sent out. Anya, who's been in the witness box now for 48 minutes, is told that the court is taking a short break. The judge tells her that because she's still in the process of giving her evidence, she can't talk to anybody, including the interpreter. Court will resume in 10 minutes, says the judge. There may be more questions for you then. Break over. The jurors are back in court, Dean's back in the dock, and Anya's back in the witness box with her interpreter. Mr. Charles confirms that he still has no further questions. Mr. Peters, however, does. Re-examination gets straightened away and straight to the point. You were asked about the passport, says Mr. Peters. Yes, says Anya. And you said that he ripped the passport up in the summer and you obtained a new passport in the summer. Yes, says Anya. It was put by learned counsel for Dean that in fact the passport was ripped up after you returned from your holiday. Is that true or not? No, says Anya. Do you have the same passport now? Asks Mr. Peters. I've got a new passport now, says Anya. And is that the passport that was issued to you in the summer? Yes. When you went to the embassy, asks Mr. Peters, was that to get a temporary passport? Yes, says Anya. She hasn't still got the temporary passport. That was just a paper, and they're only valid for a short period, she explains. They have to be given back. Mr. Peters thanks her for clarifying this and then moves on. You were asked about the oral sex, he says, and you said you were on your knees on the bed. She's asked to clarify the positions of both her and Dean, which she does. Is it the case that at first you agreed to give him oral sex, but then you stopped agreeing? Yes, says Anya. I thought that's what was going to stop all the abuse. And when you stopped agreeing, Mr. Peters continues, did you make it clear to Dean that you were no longer agreeing? Yes, says Anya. Just before that, says Mr. Peters, you said you gave him oral sex to stop him giving the abuse to you. Is that correct? Yes. Was your decision affected by the fact that he'd beaten you the night before? Anya asks Mr. Peters to repeat his question. Perhaps a better question, says the judge, is what were the circumstances prior to her agreeing? Honestly, I'm not sure that is any clearer than Mr. Peters' question, but it's put to Anya anyway. He was shouting at me, she says, calling me foul words. She's asked what those foul words were, which she now relays, before she says, I could see he would continue doing what he was doing by looking at his eyes. You were asked about somebody called Ryan, says Mr. Peters. Who is he? My ex, says Anya. Were you expecting to be asked any questions about Ryan during this trial? No, she replies. Were you surprised when you were asked questions about him, asks Mr. Peters. Mr. Charles immediately jumps to his feet and objects, which isn't something we generally see a great deal of in English trials. No, no, says Mr. Charles. I'm not sure whether that is an appropriate question. I'll approach it in a different way, says Mr. Peters. When you were first asked questions, were you immediately able to remember what you were being asked about? No, says Anya. You've now had time to think about it? Yes. Tell us what happened. Anya explains that after they'd broken up, Ryan had come to her house banging on the door in the early hours of the morning. She'd told him to go away, that she didn't want him near her. He'd pleaded with her to let him in. He was covered in blood and, she says, cocaine. He'd told her he'd been beaten up and that his car was broken. She'd let him into the house and told him he could stay. She got him a towel so he could shower, and then she went back to bed. After he'd showered, Ryan came into her bedroom, got onto her bed. That's when he started doing all of the things, Anya says, like trying to have sex with me. She said no, she's pushed him away. Ryan's persisted. He's not stopping, she says. He kept trying to touch her and talk around. So she called the police. And she's told Ryan, who's still in her bed, look, I've called the police now. You need to leave or you're going to be arrested. At which point Ryan left. When the police came, says Anya, I told them what had happened because I wanted a restraining order. I didn't want him near me. After that, says Mr. Peters, did you send an email to the police? I still can't remember about an email, she says. Did you make it known that you didn't want to go ahead? Mr. Charles is upon his feet again. No, he says, you will not lead this witness. But Anya's already answering the question. Yes, she's saying. The judge nevertheless asks Mr. Peters to put his question a different way. Yes, Mr. Peters says. He turns back to Anya. You say you cannot remember sending an email to the police. Yes, says Anya. It was put to you by the defendant's barrister that you did send an email to the police. Did you tell the police in any form that you did not wish to go ahead with it? Yes. How did you tell the police? She can't remember. But I know I've told him, presumably by him, Anya means the police officer she was dealing with at that time. But I know I've told him I don't want to go ahead because I didn't sign any papers and the case didn't go ahead. Did you tell the police a reason for not going ahead, says Mr. Peters. I can't remember, says Anya. Why did you tell police you didn't want to go ahead? She didn't want Ryan to get into trouble, she's saying. She was angry with him at the time because of the state he was in and that he'd come to her house in the middle of the night. She'd wanted a restraining order, but a sexual assault charge was too much. The prosecutor moves on to deal with the next issue raised by defence counsel. Jimmy, says Mr. Peters. Yes, says Anya, the ex-boyfriend of a friend. Yes, says Anya. Have you discussed the case with him face to face, asks Mr. Peters. Yes, says Anya. Yes, says Mr. Peters. Yes. Right. Have you spoken to him over the phone about the case? No. Have you sent text messages? Yes. What have you told him about the case? That I'm at court, says Anya. Have you told him that your intention was to tell lies about Dean to stitch him up? No, says Anya. Thank you, says Mr. Peters. He turns to the judge. There's no further re-examination, Your Honour, he says. The judge now turns to Anya. He asks her about the passport, her current one. When was it issued, he asks her. In the summer, she says. And was that before or after your holiday, asks the judge. Before, she says. I see, says the judge. He checks again that this is her current passport. Yes, it is. Do you have that available at home, the judge asks. Yes, says Anya. And that will show the date it was issued. Yes, she says. The judge thanks Anya before asking counsel if there are any other questions arising. Both Mr. Peters and Mr. Charles say there are none. Anya is now reminded by the judge that until the case is concluded, she can't discuss the case with anyone, that she must keep all matters to herself, and then she's released. But Mr. Peters says he wants to talk to her. He asks her if she wouldn't mind waiting. OK, says Anya. Anya and her interpreter are then led out of court too by an usher. It's a little after 4 p.m. There's time for one more witness, says Mr. Peters. P.C. Dudley, the officer who arrested Dean. As the judge has already told the jury, P.C. Dudley can't be in court, so he's appearing via the video link. In his evidence in chief, P.C. Dudley confirms that on the day in question, he'd been called to an address where a female was reportedly being held against her will. When he got there, he says, he found Dean and Anya on opposite ends of a 3-seater sofa. There was a kitchen knife on the sofa between them. Anya had what appeared to be fresh injuries, a cut and distinctive reddening under her right eye. Dean also had fresh injuries, a small scratch on his nose and blood on his top. P.C. Dudley arrested Dean for assault. After his colleagues spoke to Anya, Dean was further arrested on suspicion of GBH and false imprisonment. In cross-examination, Mr. Charles establishes that no one was actually holding the knife when the police arrived, and that it's not illegal to have a knife in your own home. He also confirms that Anya made no allegations of rape or sexual assault that day. If she had, P.C. Dudley says, that would have triggered specialist procedures, a forensic examination, specialist officers. None of that happened. P.C. Dudley's evidence is brief, it's less than 15 minutes long in total, but it confirms the prosecution's case, that there's been a violent assault and there are visible injuries. But it also confirms a couple of Mr. Charles's key points. The sexual allegations came later and there was a knife present. That's as far as we can go today, says the judge. The jury's escorted out and court rises. Back tomorrow for an 11 o'clock start. We're back in court for day 3 of Dean's trial. The jury was told last night to be ready for an 11 o'clock start today, but it's not 11 o'clock when things get started. It's approaching 1 o'clock when the case is called and we're finally allowed back into court. As we enter court, Anya's already in the witness box. Mr. Peters is on his feet and the court seems poised for action. The judge turns to Mr. Peters. Yes, thank you. Members of the jury, says Mr. Peters, Anya's been recalled to deal with 2 issues which arose out of cross-examination yesterday. He turns to Anya. He's straight onto the passport issue. Yesterday, says Mr. Peters, it was put to you on behalf of the defendant that in fact your passport had not been ripped up in the summer, but that Dean had ripped it up months later, in the winter, after you'd both returned from your holiday. After the hearing, he continues, I asked that you wait. And was it the case that you showed the officer in the case, Detective Constable Green and me, a photograph of your passport which you had on your phone? Yes, says Anya. As a result of which, I asked you to come back today and to bring your passport with you. Yes, says Anya. The passport is then held up by Anya so the court can see it, and photocopies of it are handed around to the judge and the jury. It's got the date of issue on it, and it was issued in the summer, just like Anya said it was. Mr. Peters moves on. You were asked about a man called Jimmy, he says. Yes, says Anya. And it was put to you on behalf of the defendant that you'd talked to him yesterday about the case, both by messenger, but also that there'd been a phone call. And in that phone call, you'd told him that you intended to stitch Dean up. Again, after the hearing, did you show DC Green and me the messages on your phone? Yes, I did, says Anya. You said to the jury that he did call you, but you didn't answer the call. Yes, replies Anya. This morning, in company with DC Green, did you produce screenshots from your phone of the text conversation and the icon for a refused call? Asks Mr. Peters. Yes. Anya's directed to some papers on the stand in front of her and she's asked to confirm that these are those screenshots. They are, she says, yes. Mr. Peters now turns to the judge. He tells the judge that these documents have all been served as additional evidence and should now be on the digital case system. The defence has also had them, he says. He then reads the messages that were exchanged between Jimmy and Anya yesterday morning to the court. It's pretty mundane stuff. Jimmy texted Anya yesterday morning to ask if she's okay. She said so. He's asked why so, and she's replied, I've got caught. Then there's a missed call from Jimmy, not to Jimmy, just like Anya's been saying. The conversation between Jimmy and Anya is then carried on over text, a series of messages between one obviously very anxious friend, Anya, and a supportive one, Jimmy. There's nothing even remotely close to what was suggested in cross-examination in these messages. Nothing. Once he's finished going through the messages in detail with Anya, Mr. Peters thanks the witness. Mr. Charles takes to his feet. Anya, says Mr. Charles, you had to come back to court today to deal with some further issues. What we all want to avoid is you having to come back tomorrow, OK? OK, says Anya. I'm going to ask you a number of questions about Jimmy, OK? OK. Did you communicate with Jimmy yesterday in any other way than what's now been disclosed in these screenshots? No, says Anya. Are you sure about that, asks Mr. Charles. Yes. Any other medium? No. He's pressing this. Did you and Jimmy ever communicate via any other medium? Yes, she says, not yesterday, but we've got each other's Snapchat. Yes, says Mr. Charles. Snapchat. Did you speak to Jimmy yesterday on Snapchat? No, says Anya. Are you sure, says Mr. Charles. I can't remember, says Anya. Just think, says Mr. Charles. Really carefully. Take all the time you need, he tells her. There's a long silence. It's not coming to mind, Anya eventually says. I can't think. The judge now interjects. Is it suggested that she did speak? His Honour asks bluntly. I'm not making any suggestions for the moment, replies Mr. Charles. Kind of is though, isn't he? Mr. Charles turns to Anya. Do you have your phone on you? He asks. She does. Well, with the judge's leave, says Mr. Charles, what I would like you to do is turn on your phone and look through its history to see if you contacted Jimmy on Snapchat yesterday. No, says the judge very quickly and very firmly. No, this should not be done in open court. It is not a voyage of discovery. OK, says Mr. Charles, so I'll do it another way. No, repeats the judge. He asks Mr. Charles if, apart from Snapchat, there are any other medium he wishes the witness to check or the officer to check. No, Your Honour. Mr. Charles turns back to Anya. So at the beginning of my questions today, he says, you said, no, you didn't speak to him via any other communication. When I suggested Snapchat, you said you couldn't think and you couldn't remember and you weren't sure. So I want to be fair to you, he says, because we're coming up to lunch. Maybe over lunch you can check. But so no one is in any doubt, what I suggest is that you did communicate with Jimmy via Snapchat yesterday, didn't you? I can't remember, says Anya. Well, you can check over lunch, can't you, says Mr. Charles. He asks Anya whether she understands that Snapchat messages disappear, that that's the whole point of Snapchat, it disappears, so it'll only show that there was some kind of contact, not what was said. Yes, says Anya, she does understand. And it's during that contact, says Mr. Charles, that you explained to Jimmy the lies you were going to tell about Dean. What do you say to that? I will check, says Anya, but I can reassure you that I've not had any calls with Jimmy, and that will be proved because I've been sat in the room with the lady from the other court and a guy called Jack, if I'm right, and I've been in front of their eyes all the time. And on the Snapchat, if you ring somebody, you come up on the loudspeaker straight away, so they would have heard everything. Can I ask you to look at a screenshot, says Mr. Charles. We don't have printouts or anything. It shows contact with a number ending in these 3 digits. The judge is straight on it. Let's do this properly, says the judge. Let's get a printout so the jury can see what you're referring to. Has this been shown to prosecuting counsel? No, says Mr. Charles. All right, sighs the judge. Members of the jury, you can have lunch now. But the jurors are still in their seats as the conversation between both counsel and the judge about the evidential and procedural logistics of dealing with Mr. Charles's new line of cross-examination. The difficulty, Mr. Peters is telling the judge, is that Anya is in the midst of giving her evidence, and he's not allowed to talk to his witness while they're in the course of giving evidence. We'll make sure that any inquiry can be conducted and conducted properly, the judge assures Mr. Peters. If the police are now going to be looking at Anya's phone again, given what the defence is raising now, there are also questions about what exactly they're looking for. Specific words, stitching Dean up, or more generally about lies being told, says Mr. Peters. We'll discuss this when the jury's gone, says the judge. Finally, an usher arrives and leads the jury out. Anya, however, is still in the witness box. Your Honour, says Mr. Peters, can I suggest that I go out of the court with the witness into the room next door where the officer is based? I'll explain to the officer what's required, and then Anya opens up her phone in front of the officer and me so we can see, and she brings up Snapchat so we can make sure there's no, as it were, adjustments or interference with that. Mr. Charles objects. Your Honour, no. I don't think that's the proper course of action at all. Is it necessary to do this in front of the witness, asks the judge. No, says Mr. Charles, it's probably not. Anya's now escorted out of the courtroom. There's clear disagreement about how to handle the Snapchat issue. Mr. Peters wants to ensure the phone checking's done transparently, in the presence of the officer and the prosecution, to avoid any suggestion of interference. But Mr. Charles objects. He doesn't want Anya supervised while she's checking her phone. The problem is, explains Mr. Charles, if it's done in front of counsel and the officer, she has no choice but to tell the truth. The judge is incredulous. So you're building her up for another lie? Yes, says Mr. Charles, and she's less likely to tell that lie if the officer's with her. The judge now asks the obvious question. Mr. Charles's suggestions yesterday that there was an actual conversation between Jimmy and Anya, a voice conversation, that, says the judge, will have been a submission to her based on evidence. It's more a question than a statement. Well, instructions, says Mr. Charles, somewhat cagily, but yes. Are you telling me, as a fact, that she hasn't told the truth, asks the judge. Do you have conclusive evidence? Well, that's my case, Mr. Charles replies. I mean, I don't know. I'm not Jimmy. It having been put to her yesterday that there had been such a conversation, I was wondering then, and I'm wondering now, says the judge, is Jimmy going to be called as a witness? I don't know, says Mr. Charles, who's becoming increasingly defensive, almost surly. I'm entitled to cross-examine the witness, he says. If the prosecution didn't want these issues arising, they shouldn't have recalled Anya in the first place. The fact is, continues Mr. Charles, the Crown chose to recall Anya to deal with this, so they have to deal with the fallout. It could have been left as it was. The judge is becoming increasingly frustrated. This Snapchat issue wasn't raised yesterday, he tells Mr. Charles. The defence has introduced it fresh, today, without notice. Mr. Charles disagrees. This arose out of the prosecution's re-examination, he says, and he's under no requirement to put the prosecution or the court on notice. No, you're not under a requirement, agrees the judge, the same as nobody is under a requirement to provide a defence case statement, but consequences follow if you don't. I am determined we are not going to jump from issue to issue with the witness being recalled every time, His Honour continues. But he agrees to deal with this issue the way Mr. Charles has proposed, by leaving Anya with the defence's invitation to check her phone over lunch and then for Mr. Charles to ask if she has checked her phone over lunch as invited. She can be asked, says the judge, but once she has been asked, we are not going backwards and forwards with this witness because you feel that you don't have to disclose your case. The fact is, if you don't disclose your case and it causes any more instances like this, you'll have to ask for permission. Well, I can deal with it this way, begins Mr. Charles, but the judge cuts him off. There's nothing to deal with, he says firmly. I've said how we are going forward. Well, in relation to permission, if she denies, begins Mr. Charles, but His Honour cuts him short. If you have to ask for permission, the judge says, we can deal with it then. With that, court rises for lunch. It's now 2:20. Anya's back in the witness box and Mr. Charles gets straight down to business. Has she now checked her phone? Yes. Was there any communication with Jimmy via Snapchat yesterday? Yes. And was there or was there not? Yes, says Anya again. It doesn't look like Mr. Charles was expecting that response from Anya. He stops himself mid-flow. There was, he asks. You did communicate. There was a message sent to him, but it was only opened today, Anya tells him. I'm sorry, says Mr. Charles, who's apparently still a little taken aback. Explain that again. I have sent a message to Jimmy, says Anya. When? Yesterday, she says. Yes, asks Mr. Charles. Via Snapchat, she says. I don't know what has been said because I can't remember. But the message from his side was only opened today, she says. Mr. Charles now confirms with Anya that the phone can't provide definitive evidence on the issue of whether there was also a call. Snapchat only records the last method of communication, and the last communication recorded on the log is the message Anya sent yesterday that Jimmy's opened and read today. Any phone call prior to that message wouldn't be shown in the app. Mr. Charles summarises their position. I say there was a phone call, he says. You say there was not. And that's where we are. Is that fair? Yes, says Anya. But do you agree now that you did have Snapchat communication with Jimmy yesterday? Yes. 2:30. Re-examination by Mr. Peters for the prosecution. Mr. Peters spends the next 5 or so minutes asking Anya questions that confirm 2 things. First, that there's no evidence of a phone conversation with Jimmy yesterday. And second, that Anya wasn't in a position to have a phone conversation with Jimmy yesterday because she'd been in a waiting room all morning with her interpreter and 2 people from the witness service. She'd then been brought to the trial court because of the video link failure, a journey in which she'd been accompanied throughout and that she'd been accompanied while she was at court waiting to take the stand. The judge thanks Anya and she's released. The jury's sent out for a break. It's 2:45. The jury's back from its break and Mr. Peters is about to read a witness statement into evidence. We've come across this before in Tariq's trial and in Jerome's trial, but it's worth flagging up again. First, so you can see that it does happen, that not every witness in a criminal case has to testify and undergo cross-examination. Second, so you can see why this happens. And third, so you're clear on what the jury's told, because I may have skimmed over this a bit quickly in previous episodes. Members of the jury, says the judge, in advance of the trial starting, considerably in advance of the trial starting, very obviously, documents are provided by the prosecution which make up their case, and counsel look at those documents and decide which witnesses are required. It would be a waste of your time and the witness's time if a witness came to court when nothing was in dispute about what they were going to say and they wouldn't be asked any questions. So in those circumstances, the witness is not required to come to court, but instead their witness statement is read to you. I'm sure you can understand that makes perfect sense. That being the case, the evidence not being controversial, you should accept this evidence just as if the witness had come here to give it themselves and put it into the factual matrix for you to consider in due course. Thank you, Your Honour, says Mr. Peters. Members of the jury, he continues, this is the statement of P.C. Walker. The prosecutor reads the statement of truth that's contained in every witness statement. It's like the out-of-court equivalent to taking the oath, but rather than swearing to God you're going to tell the truth, the person making the statement confirms that it is true and that they know they face being prosecuted if it's not. Mr. Peters then proceeds to the content of P.C. Walker's written statement. Walker is a firearms officer. He was on duty on the day in question when a call came in about a woman being held against her will at an address. He attended that address with colleagues. When they arrived, a man, Dean, answered the door and allowed them in. Walker's statement describes seeing a woman on the sofa, now known to be Anya, and that he, Walker, instantly noticed substantial injuries to Anya's face. There was also a knife on the sofa. PC Walker led Anya out of the sitting room and upstairs, and Dean was shouting at her throughout. His statement then lists the many visible injuries he'd witnessed before relaying what Anya had told him, PC Walker, once they were upstairs. She'd said that Dean had hit her, he's her boyfriend, he's flipped out because she's cheated on him, he's repeatedly hit her and tried to strangle her in a prolonged attack. Although Dean would calm down for a bit, Anya's told him he'd start assaulting her again. He won't let her leave, he's taken photographs of her, and he's shown her injuries to his friends. PC Walker's statement concludes that Dean was arrested and escorted out of the premises and that Anya agreed to receive medical treatment. Mr. Peters now calls his next witness, Detective Constable Green, the officer in the case. It's 10-3. DC Green's evidence in chief is pretty straightforward. He and a colleague, a trainee detective, attended the local hospital to see Anya. At the hospital, DC Green seized, which is just police speak for taken, collected. He seized Anya's clothing. He also took photos of Anya's injuries. The following morning, again with the same trainee detective constable, he conducted a video interview with Anya. He also conducted the second interview with Anya a few months later. Mr. Peters asks why it was a video interview rather than a written statement. Because of Anya's injuries, DC Green explains, we do this very often with domestic violence cases when they've got substantial injuries to the facial area. DC Green's then asked whether he'd conducted the interviews with Dean. Yes, he was interviewed under caution and Dean had a solicitor with him during his interview. Dean chose not to answer questions and went no comment through both interviews. DC Green confirms that yes, armed response officers had originally attended the scene, and no, firearms officers aren't ordinarily involved in the investigation of sex offences. Sexual offences are normally investigated by specialist officers, he explains. Specialist officers who've been trained in terms of what evidence to look for, what to collect, and how. Sexual allegations were made in this case, but not until Anya was video interviewed the following day. This, the delay in reporting, explains DC Green, is why there was no forensic examination of either the scene or Anya. By the time we discovered what had happened, and given the circumstances surrounding it, we wouldn't gain anything forensically from doing an examination with Anya. And in terms of looking for semen, DC Green continues, if the alleged incident happened between a couple who've been sharing the same bed, furniture, sheets and so on, there's not much point in doing that normally. In cross-examination, Mr. Charles presses Green on the forensics, well, the absence of them. Why hadn't samples been taken of the vomit? The attending officers didn't say they'd found any vomit, says Green. Mr. Charles sounds surprised. They didn't say they'd found vomit. Did they say they didn't find any? They said they'd found blood, says DC Green. As a matter of logic, inference and deduction, says Mr. Charles, if they'd found vomit, you'd expect they would have recorded that and told you. Yes, says DC Green. So by the same inference, they didn't find it. They found blood, says DC Green. They didn't say vomit. Mr. Charles moves on. My learned friend has pointed out that officers are trained in sexual offences investigative techniques. They're SOIT trained, he says. DC Green agrees. Yes, some are. The point Mr. Charles is making here is that DC Green is a domestic violence specialist, not a sexual offences specialist, which DC Green, of course, accepts. Mr. Charles then directs DC Green to the transcript of the video interviews with Anya. The jury doesn't have this transcript. We'll talk about why in another episode. The point here simply is that they don't. Mr. Charles flicks through the transcript. It's a relatively thick document and he's a fair way into it. For the benefit of those who do have the transcript, he says, page 27, it's about 45 minutes in before Anya makes any mention of what's our count one. Do you agree with that? I stand to be corrected. There's a pause. Can you say that again, says DC Green. It's about 45 minutes in, says Mr. Charles. The rape. It's an allegation of oral rape and there's a sexual assault, an allegation of grabbing at the vagina. It's about 45 minutes in before she first mentions that. OK, says Green, but he doesn't sound convinced. I'll stand to be corrected, Mr. Charles repeats. I don't know, says DC Green. I don't know the time. Mr. Peters will correct me, Mr. Charles asserts, or the judge will. And what she said was this. She was describing him attacking her. All the time he's been speaking, both Mr. Peters and the judge have been busily going back and forth through the transcript. There's been a soundtrack of flapping pages as both are trying to locate Anya's first mention of sexual assault, probably because Mr. Charles's assertion that it took Anya about 45 minutes to mention being sexually assaulted seems to be an important defence point, and it seems incorrect, given the video we watched yesterday. Also, as an aside, having seen a lot of counsel who start their questions with, I stand to be corrected, actually then being corrected, this, on the face of it, rather innocuous little phrase tends to signal that counsel is not entirely confident about whatever it is he or she is asserting. The judge now interrupts Mr. Charles mid-flow. Can you look at page 6, His Honour says. Mr. Charles and Mr. Peters both flick back through the transcript. Ah, says Mr. Charles, I said I stand to be corrected. So the interview starts at 10:48, says the judge. Yes, says Mr. Charles. So it's about 9 minutes in, says the judge. It's now Mr. Charles's turn to flick back and forth through the pages. I'm just trying to find it, he says. It's the third paragraph on page 6, says the judge, beginning, oh, but... Mr. Charles still doesn't seem to be able to find the text the judge is referring to. Well, he eventually says, I'm going to suggest that there was no mention of Dean grabbing Anya's vagina until about 45 minutes in. If that's wrong, I stand to be corrected, but I can't see it. But it may be. I want to go then, he says, to page 29. The judge interrupts Mr. Charles again. Well, shall we let the witness answer, he asks. But he doesn't have a transcript, objects Mr. Charles. He ought to have a transcript, says the judge. I agree, says Mr. Charles. I can get someone to print it off, Mr. Peters offers. Is there another way of doing it, asks Mr. Charles. There is. DC Green is now handed one of the lawyers' laptop with the electronic copy of the interview transcript showing on the screen. Now, DC Green, says Mr. Charles, I'm sure you understand this isn't a test, because if I'm wrong, I will be corrected. Now, just so there's no misunderstanding, earlier in the interview, she talks about being kicked in her bits. The allegation is that Dean grabbed her vagina. My suggestion is she didn't make any such suggestion at all until, can you see, he guides DC Green to a paragraph a good way into the transcript. Basically, says Mr. Charles, as I'm sure the jury will have understood, the way these interviews are done, a complainant will be given an opportunity to tell police what's happened without much interruption. That's their general account. Then officers will go through and break that down and ask more specific questions. DC Green agrees. Yes, this is the general approach to video interviews like this. So, 45 minutes in, Mr. Charles continues, the concentration is on the first day of the assault. Anya explains that she was told to get on her knees on the bed and he's kicking her. Then, quote, Dean told me to lie down. I lied down, and because I'd got so many layers on, he told me to take them off, and I was like, no, I don't want to. Now, this is the important part I'd suggest, says Mr. Charles. He lied me down and tried to, pinch my bits. I just pushed him off. Do you agree that what she says is he tried to pinch her bits? Asks Mr. Charles. DC Green agrees, yes. She doesn't at this point say he did pinch her bits as alleged, does she? Continues Mr. Charles. Not in those words, no, says DC Green. Well, she doesn't, OK, says Mr. Charles. No, says DC Green. One of the points of the interview, says Mr. Charles, is to establish whether he did or he didn't. Follow-up questions. Again, I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, but going down to page 30 and you're asking some questions, quote, when you were on the bed and he was kicking you, where did he kick you? Answer, between my legs and on my arse. And then you said, how many times did he kick you there? And she said about 4 or 5 times. And then you say this, quote, and he started pinching your bits. What do you mean by bits? Yes, says DC Green. Do you accept that you've actually overstated what Anya complained about? And I use the word complaint in technical terms, says Mr. Charles. Possibly, answers DC Green slowly. Because, says Mr. Charles, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, she doesn't say anywhere any more than he tried to pinch my bits. And then 2 minutes later you say, as if you've understood it, and he started pinching your bits. What do you mean by this? Obviously we can infer she means vagina, but there was no further discussion about this suggestion that he tried to, or he did pinch her vagina. No, says DC Green, I'll take your word on that one. I mean, I might be wrong, says Mr. Charles. I may have been wrong earlier, I might be wrong now, but I don't think that's discussed. OK, yes, says DC Green, who now also agrees that this issue, whether Dean's attempts to pinch Anya's bits were or were not successful, wasn't sufficiently explored in the first interview and wasn't addressed at all in the second. It's not a criticism, says Mr. Charles, although, listener, I think it is. Anyway, it's not a criticism, Mr. Charles is saying, but the fact is you're not SOIT trained, are you? That's correct, says DC Green. And I suggest you've overlooked any opportunity to clarify what is it precisely she's alleging. Yes, says DC Green. Because there's no allegation that he pinched her bits in there at all, says Mr. Charles. What she alleged is that he tried to. That's not the way I saw it, says DC Green. Obviously, that's not the way you saw it, Mr. Charles comes back, but that's actually, on forensic examination, the truth of the matter. She doesn't complain about it. She says he tried to. She does, says DC Green. Mr. Charles now moves on to the suspect interview DC Green conducted with Dean. Now, as far as the interview is concerned, he says, the solicitor was present, and my learned friend is right when he says that Dean chose not to answer questions. But just so the jury understands the mechanics of how that works. He's not sitting in a room with a solicitor and nobody knows what's coming. You just ask questions and he just says no comment. There's a lot of things that happen up until that part, aren't there? Yes, says DC Green, there is. Mr. Charles summarises what those things are. He's arrested, he says. He's told he has a right to free independent legal advice. The solicitor will be given some pre-interview disclosure which would enable her to have a confidential discussion between herself and Dean for as long as needed, talking about whatever disclosure you've given her, which is basically the nature of the allegations, a summary of what she'd said about Dean, and the two of them talk, whatever is said between them, and then, when they're ready, they go into an interview. That's correct, says DC Green. So it's after he's had the benefit of legal advice, Mr. Charles emphasises. Yes. All of this is a choice. Yes. And it's after that privileged and confidential discussion that he made the choice not to answer your questions. Yes. But you can confirm that when Anya was brought into her video, that was for allegations of domestic violence, says Mr. Charles. Yes, there was no suggestion of sexual abuse at all. No, agrees DC Green. It came out, the allegation of oral rape, Mr. Charles continues, 9 minutes in, as His Honour pointed out. But, he says, I would have thought that was something that would be a surprise to yourself. You don't have to answer that, he adds quickly. But this wasn't a rape interview, was it? No, says DC Green. Thank you, says Mr. Charles. Wait there. Mr. Peters takes to his feet. He has some further questions for DC Green. Just so the jury understand, he says, they didn't see all of the actual video interview, did they? Some parts had been edited out. Yes, that's correct, says DC Green. The point Mr. Peters is trying to get across here is that even the 9-minute delay Mr. Charles has suggested before Anya makes any allegations of a sexual nature is misleading. The ABE interview begins with various procedural formalities. It's a while before a complainant is asked any actual substantive questions. When Anya's substantive interview actually began, she gave what Mr. Peters is now describing as an almost breathless, non-stop narrative, which was both comprehensive and chronological, and, crucially, included both of the alleged sexual acts. Yes, says DC Green. But, he agrees, the allegation that Dean had been trying to pinch her vagina, that came later, when DC Green was breaking down Anya's initial account and asking more detailed questions. Mr. Charles stands and addresses the judge. What the witness said is clear, he says. What the officer says is not evidence in terms of what the questions are. The officer was asked questions about what stage pinching was mentioned, retorts Mr. Peters. But there you are, he says. I'm making the point anyway. The prosecutor turns back to DC Green. He's asking now about the blood at the scene and Mr. Charles's insinuation that there was, in fact, no vomit. DC Green agrees that, given that Anya had described her vomit as being a mix of blood and vomit, officers could well have mistaken that for blood alone. With no more questions from either the defence or from the judge, DC Green is now released from the stand. It's 3:20. Mr. Peters addresses the judge. Subject to a short application, he says, that is the case for the Crown. The judge asks how long the application will take. About 10 minutes, Mr. Peters replies. I suspect it may be longer, says Mr. Charles. The judge smiles. I'm assuming it will be, he says quietly. The jury's sent out for a break. Once the jury's gone, His Honour turns to Mr. Peters. Is this a bad character application, he asks. Yes, it is. Dean's got some previous convictions that the prosecutor wants the jury to know about. In fact, Dean appears to have an extensive criminal history, but there are a number of convictions Mr. Peters is keen to lead. In particular, a string of violent offences perpetrated against ex-girlfriends and partners, including Erica, the second complainant in this case as it was originally proceeding. Remember, Dean pleaded guilty to 3 counts of ABH relating to Anya and to a number of charges relating to a second complainant, Erica. The jury's heard about the guilty pleas in relation to Anya, but they haven't heard a peep about those relating to Erica. Also, can you remember when the prosecution opened this case in episode 5, the jury was told that Anya had gone to pick Dean up from, quote, somewhere in the car. Well, that somewhere was prison. Anya picked him up from prison when he was released having served a custodial sentence for another violent offence. But the jury hasn't heard that detail, that the somewhere Dean was picked up from was prison, because being in prison is bad character evidence, and it's therefore been excluded, at least up until now. If the jury are going to hear about Dean's previous convictions and his release from prison on the day of the first violent assault, Mr. Peters needs a ruling from the judge. Now, without getting too bogged down in the law here, Section 101 of the Criminal Justice Act 2003 provides that evidence of a defendant's bad character is admissible, so it can be presented to the jury, if, but only if, one of the admissibility gateways in Section 101 of the Act is engaged. In other words, bad character evidence isn't automatically admissible. And regardless of how the statutory provision is worded, i.e. evidence is admissible if, the starting point is that it's not admissible. It's admissible if means exactly the same as it's inadmissible unless. So Mr. Peters needs to persuade the judge that evidence of Dean's previous convictions fall within one of the 7 admissibility gateways, 7 different circumstances or scenarios contained in the Act. The defence has already let it be known that they're going to be opposing this application, which means the first gateway, that all the relevant parties to proceedings agree the evidence is admissible, that's ruled out. Mr. Peters is suggesting to the judge there are two possible gateways here. The first, he says, is Section 1011D. Under this gateway, Mr. Peters would be arguing that Dean's history of violence against women shows a propensity to commit the offences with which he's charged. Under normal circumstances, says Mr. Peters, it would be something of a stretch legally to say that because a man has a habit of beating women up, that necessarily shows he has a propensity to commit sexual offences. But, he continues, these aren't normal circumstances. The prosecution's case is that the sexual offences here were sexual, but they were visited on the complainant as a punishment. They were part and parcel of a prolonged violent assault. The second gateway, Mr. Peters suggests, arises by virtue of the way the defence has run its case, which, he says, amounts to an unequivocal attack on Anya's character. The defence haven't simply said that the alleged sexual offences are denied by Dean. They've said she's deliberately set out to make matters worse for Dean by making these allegations up, and, moreover, that she's told Jimmy expressly that this is what she's doing. This, says Mr. Peters, opens the second admissibility gateway, Section 1011G, that the defendants made an attack on another person's character. And, says Mr. Peters, if he's applying for leave under this gateway, then he's going to be asking for the court's leave to adduce all of Dean's previous convictions, including, but not limited to, his convictions for violent offences against previous partners. The judge is looking thoughtful. I think this is the section, the attack on another person's character gateway, which is most appropriate, His Honour finally says, but he's not going to deal with it right now. He tells counsel he wants a written application and he wants the defence to have the opportunity to respond in writing. I know nobody likes having to do it, says the judge, but it does concentrate the mind, and if an aspect of the application is not to be pursued, it doesn't have to be dealt with by Mr. Charles or myself, so that's what we'll do. In other words, I think Mr. Peters has just been told, in a very gracious and judicious way, to do his own homework, to go away, pick his gateway and come back with a focused and well-reasoned written application which they'll deal with tomorrow. Mr. Charles now says he has his own submission to make, which, he says, isn't going to take long, but will take a little bit of time at least. The judge asks for the jury to be brought back in. There's a matter of law that needs to be dealt with, His Honour explains. He's sending them home until 2 p.m. tomorrow. It's 3:45. With the jury now gone, that's the evidence done for today. But there's that matter of law that Mr. Charles has just flagged up that needs to be dealt with. And it's a biggie. Not so much in terms of time, but in terms of its implications. So it needs a careful look. We'll start there in episode 7, the final part of Dean's trial. If you've got questions or comments about anything raised in this episode or anything else this season, I'd love to hear from you. Email me at host@criminaljusticeinAction.com. I can incorporate them in relevant parts in future episodes. And if I get lots of questions on the same topic or issue, I can dedicate a special episode to it. If you've been affected by any of the issues raised in this episode, please visit our website, criminaljusticeinAction.com, for information about help and support. Criminal Justice in Action is a Scrutiny Media production, researched, written and presented by Dr Candida Saunders, edited and produced by Candida Saunders and Gary Saunders, music by Anya.